Happy Halloween, everyone. Shirley Jackson is most famous for her short story, The Lottery, as well as her novels, We Have Always Lived in the Castle and The Haunting of Hill House. She also wrote housekeeping articles for women's magazines. Do with that knowledge what you will. Anyway, today we are talking about The Haunting of Hill House, the novel. Yes, that has been made into a movie several times, and a Netflix series not too long ago. I haven't seen any of them, but I've read the novel several times. I am teaching it now to my literature class for the second time, and I love this novel reading it as a writer, because I have learned a lot about writing from reading Shirley Jackson. So keep watching, and I'm going to share with you 3 important techniques that I picked up while reading this novel. Stephen King calls The Haunting of Hill House one of only 2 truly great supernatural horror novels of the 20th century, the other one being The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. If you're going to read either of them, I recommend The Haunting of Hill House. It's, in my personal taste, much more fun to read. Without further ado, here are my 3 big takeaways that have helped improve my writing from closely reading The Haunting of Hill House, and how they might help you improve as a writer as well. Number 1 is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is crucial. When it's used properly, it gives each payoff in your story, right up to and including the climax, the proper setup, so that that payoff comes as a surprise, but in retrospect feels inevitable. Everything makes sense looking back through the story. So if it's too on the nose, foreshadowing reveals the coming events before they happen, and thus they spoil any sense of suspense for the reader. But if foreshadowing is too thin, or too subtle, or just not present at all, then every payoff falls flat, because they seem to come out of nowhere. It's a complete disappointment every single time. Because those payoffs that don't have a proper setup, that weren't foreshadowed, aren't believable in the mind of the reader, you lose reader investment, and you lose the emotional connection. The foreshadowing in Haunting of Hill House, though, is like Goldilocks' last bowl of porridge. It's just right. There is a lot of it, but you don't know where it's leading you until you get there. Foreshadowing pays off in a huge way on rereads. And this is why you can tell a book is really, really well written if you want to reread it to find all the foreshadowing elements after you've gotten to the climax the first time. When you go back through the narrative and start to recognize all the subtle little signposts the author set up along the way, leading you to whatever the payoff happens to be, whether it is the mid-act climax or the dark night of the soul or the final resolution to the problem. And yes, this is one of the reasons I have read this book 6+ times, because the first read was just for enjoyment. It's the second and third reads, and the fourth reads, and the fifth reads where I've really gotten into reading it like a writer and delving into the techniques that Shirley Jackson uses to create such a creepy vibe and such great suspense, at the same time with a little touch of humor overlapping everything that just keeps you wanting to read more, that really makes you feel like you're reading a story from a friend, but a very, very spooky story from that friend. So I don't want to spoil anything that's being foreshadowed. I can possibly avoid it, because I want you guys to have the pleasure of reading this for yourself if you never read it before, and getting to each surprise on your own for the first time. But I gotta read you a few things just to show you what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna read you a piece of setup, and this happens very early on, so not much of a spoiler. This is page 12 to 13. This is when the main character, by the way, who has been invited to go stay at Hill House for a scientific experiment, experimenting on whether the house is haunted or not, decides to go. She's on her way. She's driving from a faraway town to this big house in the middle of kind of nowhere. And so she's on the road. She had left the town far behind now, and was going past dirty, closed lunch stands and torn signs. There had been a fair somewhere near here once, long ago, with motorcycle races. The signs still carried fragments of words. Dare, one of them read, in big capital letters, and another, evil. And she laughed at herself, perceiving how she sought out omens everywhere. The word is daredevil, Eleanor, daredevil drivers. And she slowed her car because she was driving too fast and might reach Hill House too soon. What Could that be foreshadowing, I wonder? Read the book and find out. And after you've read it, go back through the narrative and see if you can find all the different ways the author set up the payoffs that were to come. And then see if you can emulate her tricks for yourself. How will you use foreshadowing in your own writing? How can you set signposts along the way subtly that pay off in the end, that pay off when a certain problem is resolved in your story? Number 2 is motif. Now, this device is closely tied to foreshadowing. They overlap somewhat, but motif has more functions than just to foreshadow things. A motif is any element that repeats itself multiple times throughout the narrative. It could be an idea, a symbol, an image, a piece of figurative language, a specific word or phrase, or a recurring event. It's the recurrence that makes it a motif. By the way, this doesn't include everyday phrases or common words like the. We're talking about elements that are specific and unusual enough for their recurrence to be noticeable and memorable. So again, motifs can and often do foreshadow things, but they can also be used to characterize, to establish mood and emotional resonance, and to develop theme. Some motifs you might want to look for in Hill House to see how this is all constructed include the closing of doors, and just doors and doorways in general, the imagery surrounding them. Light and dark, when and where those are placed, the contrasting imagery there. And then there's also a good deal of color symbolism. Look for blue and green associated with Eleanor, and red associated with Theo. Another motif is when Eleanor, who is the protagonist, thinks of the same song lyric snippets over and over again throughout the book, starting early on in her journey and recurring as the visit to the house continues, and more strange things are happening and the tension is heightening. Each recurrence feels more and more sinister. The lines are like present mirth hath present laughter. In delay there lies no plenty. And journeys end in lovers meeting. And I'm not even going to mention the sentence that appears later on written in blood on the wall. Moving on. Number 3 that I picked up from Shirley Jackson is the use of language. Shirley Jackson is one of the great American stylists of the 20th century. If you want to develop a good style and voice of your own, you need to read widely and deeply. And what you should be doing, one exercise that you could do, that I have taught my students before, that I have done many times throughout my writing career to improve my writing style, my voice, my use of the language, is to closely read and practice imitating a wide variety of stylists. So I've built and still am building my style from a variety of sources. Writers like Shakespeare, Poe, Twain, Tolkien, James Baldwin, Douglas Adams, Flannery O'Connor, Ray Bradbury, Mickey Spillane, Ursula Le Guin, C.S. Lewis, Jack London, and yes, Shirley Jackson, not to mention dozens or hundreds of others. Of course, you don't want to copy someone else's style for long, but as you keep at it, if you try this practice and work at it, and reading and mimicking, and then forgetting all that and just writing for yourself, and then reading some more and mimicking again, and then letting it all go and just doing your own thing, and then doing it again and again and again, reading again wide variety of different stylists. And eventually you'll start to develop your own voice. The most obvious example of Shirley Jackson's prose that just leaps out to me and is find really compelling and really just drew me into this book and got me hooked on Shirley Jackson was this opening paragraph from the very first chapter of the book. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Oh, that was jarring. Yeah, I recorded most of this video 4 days ago and got interrupted by my 4-year-old right after I read that passage and didn't get a chance to come back to it until today. It is Halloween, by the way. So, I am going to finish shooting this, I'm going to edit it and post it the best I can, and then I'm going to go take my 4-year-old out trick-or-treating. It's going to be fun. I'm Superman, he's Batman, my wife is Wonder Woman, so we are the real Justice League. Back to that passage. I don't know about you, but that paragraph that opens Hill House compels me to read further. I have to know more about this house. Notice all the mysteries she sets up for us within just that first few sentences. What are conditions of absolute reality? Given the context of the sentence, I assume it's some kind of state of extreme wakefulness or total awareness. But by using the words conditions of absolute reality, she seems to mean more than that, and I want to find out what. Then we get Hill House itself described as not sane. What does it even mean for a house to be sane? And yet, the house isn't described as we would expect a house to be described if it was already described as insane. Notice, it had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. From that description, it sounds like what we might imagine as a perfectly sane house. And yet that description is juxtaposed with holding darkness within. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. And of course, it's already been described as not sane. This contrast between a seemingly sane-looking house and an insane moniker being put on it gives us an unsettling feeling, particularly with the darkness and the silence. The implication being, of course, Hill House itself has existed for a long time under conditions of absolute reality and is now not sane, if it ever was. But if Hill House's construction is still sensibly in order, what's insane about it? And how will that insanity come forth and affect Hill House's visitors? As you read Hill House, and especially as you reread it, make sure you're reading like a writer. That means pay close attention to specific word choices, as well as the construction of sentence arrangements. What particular words does Shirley Jackson choose to insert in what places to produce what kind of effects? And how does she vary her sentence structure to keep us engaged, as well as to emphasize the elements that she wants us to notice? I'll read you one more paragraph from the book as a teaser, and I'll let you break that down for yourself. Maybe we can discuss a little bit more in the comments down below. This is the second paragraph from the second chapter. This is after Eleanor, our protagonist, has just come to Hill House and she's seeing it for the first time. I should have turned back at the gate, Eleanor thought. The house had caught her with an atavistic turn in the pit of the stomach, and she looked along the lines of its roofs, fruitlessly endeavoring to locate the badness, whatever dwelt there. Her hands turned nervously cold so that she fumbled, trying to take out a cigarette, and beyond everything else she was afraid, listening to the sick voice inside her which whispered, "Get away from here, get away." What specifically did Shirley Jackson do in that paragraph, and what is its effect? Give it a try for yourself. And guys, I hope if you haven't read Hill House yet, that you'll go and you'll read it right away. It doesn't need to be read in October. It takes place in June, same month as the lottery. Shirley Jackson apparently had a thing about June as a creepy month. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead and read it, because this is a masterclass in literature writing, in writing horror, in writing stories, in wordcraft. It's just an amazing book. Now, I am not saying that this is the best horror book ever written. People tend to yell at me about which stories I choose to talk about on this channel. I'm not saying it's the greatest horror novel ever. I'm not saying it's the scariest horror novel ever. I'm not even saying it's the greatest haunted house novel ever. But it is a great horror novel. It is a great haunted house novel. It is a great novel in general. And there's all sorts of reasons to read it. It's very readable and accessible. It's not like I'm trying to ask you to read James Joyce's Ulysses here. It's a lot of fun to read. And if you're a writer with my similar brain set, I think you're going to get a lot out of it. So by all means, post in the comments below. Let me know what you think of The Haunting of Hill House. And I'd love to know what you think about the movies/TV shows that have been made of it as well, because I'm curious, should I watch any of them? Are they worth it? You guys let me know. And please like the video and subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. Moving up on 3,000 subscribers now. That's awesome. Thank you guys. And again, happy Halloween and good luck and good writing. Peace.